Oh, moontide, moontide, the water is deep and the water is wide. And the moon and the tide brought us here to dance all night in the sky so near. When the moon goes down, the sun appears, and it's home to the waves and the water so dear. Now, on this particular beach, on this particular night, an old fisherman was rowing home late one night after casting his nets off the outer banks. And he heard the sound of singing across the water, and he looked and he saw the Selkies dancing under the full moon. And he shipped his oars and he sat for a long time on the dark water watching them dance and listening to them sing. And there was one particular Selkie there who caught his eye and made his heart race, because like him, her face was a mass of wrinkles. And her great mane of hair was the color of driftwood long, long on the beach. But she was as merry and jumped as high as any in that company, and he watched for a long time before setting his oars in the water and rowing away home. And when next the moon was full, the old fisherman took a basket, and he filled it full of fish with the day's catch. And he walked down from his little house on the beach to the beach where he knew the Selkies would be dancing. And when he walked out onto their beach, they were afraid. And they ran to the far end of the beach and huddled around their sealskins, because in all the stories, a man who is in love with a Selkie will steal her skin and take away her power so that she cannot go back into the water and she has to stay with him. But the old fisherman showed them the fish that he had brought as a gift, and he held out his hands to show that he meant no harm. And he walked up to the old Selkie and he said, "I am old, and the few years that remain to me would be but the blink of an eye to one such as you who lives so long. I am afraid of the dying and the darkness, and I would like to ask you to come and live with me in my house until the day comes." And the old Selkie glared at him, and she thrust her sealskin behind her, and he said, No, I would never try to take your sealskin from you. What a terrible thing that would be. I'm too old for love, but I would hope for friendship freely given. And the old Selkie's eyes grew wide until they were almost perfectly round, and she kind of did look like a seagull. And she peered at him, and she stretched out one hand and touched him gently on the side of the cheek, and she said but a single word. She said, "Wait." And then, giggling like a schoolgirl, she threw on her sealskin and dove home beneath the waves. The old fisherman went back to his house, and he went to sea, mended his nets. He caught his fish and he sold his catch at market. And that night with the Selkies faded like a dream that comes just before sunrise. But when next the moon was full, the old fisherman takes his basket and fills it full of fish. He walks down the beach to where the Selkies were dancing, and the old Selkie walks up to him and she holds out her hand, and she spoke but a single word. She said, "Dance." Moon and tide, the water is deep and the water is wide. Oh, the moon and tide brought us here to dance all night in the sky so clear. And when the moon goes down and the sun appears, then it's home to the waves and the water so dear. And the old fisherman danced all night with the Selkies. And in the morning, before she went home to the sea, the old Selkie reached out and touched his cheek quietly. And when next the moon was full, the old fisherman fills his basket full of fish. He goes down to the beach where the Selkies were dancing. He danced all night long with the Selkies. And at the end of the night, the old Selkie came up to him, and she held out her hand, and she spoke but a single word. She said, "Beer." The old fisherman pulled out his knife that had cut rope and fish and nets, and he cut off his great beard square beneath his chin, and he gave her his beard, and she took it with her into the water. When next the moon was full, the old fisherman fills his basket full of fish. He went down to the beach where the Selkies were dancing. He danced all night long with the Selkies, and at the end of the night, the old Selkie walks up to him, and she held out her hand, and she spoke but a single word. She said, hair. Well, out comes the knife again, and it cuts off his great mane of hair square across the top of his head, and he looked really silly, bits sticking out like gray straw. And all the Selkies laughed and ran their hands over his head, and he laughed with them. But he handed the hair to the old Selkie, and she took it with her into the sea. When next the moon was full, the old fisherman filled his basket of fish, walked down the beach, danced all night long with the Selkies, and at the end of the night, the old Selkie came up to him, and she had the seashell of a little creature that he had never seen. And she held it out, and she spoke but a single word. She said, blood. Came the knife again, and a moment later, the tiny shell was full of blood, and she cradled it like a newborn as she went back into the dark water. And thereafter, every month that the old fisherman would go down and dance with the Selkies, at the end of the night, the old Selkie would come up, say but one word, and ask him for a gift. And one time it was one of his boots, and he walked home in one boot and one sock. One time she asked for his greatcoat that he wore to sea when the weather grew foul. And each time that she asked something from him, he gave it to her freely, without question or condition. And then there came the night that the moon rose full over fields ripe for harvest, and the salmon were swimming upstream in every river. The old fisherman filled his basket full of fish, and he walked down to the beach, and he gave the fish to his friends, but he was really tired that night, and he couldn't dance. So he sat on the keel of a long-ago shipwreck. And his friend sat with him and held his hand. And they watched the Selkies dance and listened to them sing all night long. And when the sun was turning the eastern sky to pale wheat, one by one the Selkies came up and said good night and went home into the sea. And the old Selkie helped the old fisherman up. She helped him walk down to the edge of the water. And this time, she had a gift for him, because she reached into the sand and she pulled out his very own seal skin that she had made with her magic and all the gifts that he had freely given her without question or condition. And she showed him how to wriggle into it, and she wriggled into hers, and they both stood there at the edge of the water with just their faces showing like children playing in the blankets just before bedtime. He laughed with the silly joy of it, and she laughed too. And then she spoke but a single word. She said, love. Then quick as a salmon flashing bright, both of them pulled their seal cowls over their faces, and together they dove home beneath the waves. The moon goes down and the sun appears. Then it's home in the